Welcome to the Accounting Arc Podcast, where analysis, reaction, and comedy collide to tackle the big topics from the world of accounting and beyond. Join our trio of transformation agents as they discuss the hottest topics in and out of the profession, from breaking down industry trends, to reacting to everyday events, to uncovering the hidden humor in numbers. With wisdom, insight, and a dash of levity, they're proving that accounting isn't just about the numbers. It's about life. Because after all, accounting is in everything. The Accounting Arc Podcast starts now.
Welcome back to the ARC podcast. Byron and I are here today talking about some interesting ethical conversations and sin industries and what it means as a CPA who also might have a side hustle and what side hustles are considered good, what clients are good. So let's jump in. Byron, what's the most sin industry client you have ever worked on?
Most sin I have ever, this was my technology company. We hosted servers for a financial advisor who also ran a strip club.
Okay. I hope you didn't carry bags of cash for that client too.
There was no bags of cash involved.
That might be an ethical issue, but good.
And oddly enough, his third business was ATM machine rentals, we felt like he was kind of like creating his own ecosystem of ATM machines, strip clubs, and financial advising. It was a fun client to have.
That is a fun client. So I have spent my career working with lots of sin industry clients. I started my professional career in Nevada, working with casinos, and I worked with some brothels. I prepared tax returns for legal prostitutes, I can say that, as well as, doing casino audits and casino tax returns and all sorts of really interesting things at the beginning of my career on that side. And then I continued that path on my own, where I started working with cannabis companies pretty early on, before cannabis was as accepted as it is today. I started working with them when it was state legal, So for me, I think there's other conversations around where the line is. And then also, the federal government was still going after these state legal companies. So that was a very, very interesting time. A dozen years ago to be working on these types of clients. So I think there is a very interesting conversation to be had around ethics in the CPA profession and what that looks like and where the line is. So for you, Byron, what's your line and how do you distinguish what's okay to participate in from a client perspective versus a personal perspective versus what affects your CPA license?
Yeah, that's, I want to make it that like a hard question to answer, but I feel like it's an easy question to answer. Like it's very close to black and white. There may be like a very slim line of gray in there, but is it illegal or is it not? Is like a very clear black and white. Now, of course, there may be like times when something is outside of maybe an individual's personal values, but from a ethics perspective and, being a CPA, for me, it's fairly simple distinction of is it legal, is it not? And I realize like in your case with maybe those cannabis clients, especially in the early days when it may have been illegal in the state in which those companies existed, but illegal in the eyes of the federal government. Maybe in that case, the black and white is not as easy to define. How did you approach those types of, potentially conflicting scenarios?
So I think for me, from an ethical perspective, my code of ethics is to support businesses, right? Like that is what I'm supposed to do. I am supposed to help companies. I'm supposed to maintain independence from those companies if I'm doing any kind of audit procedures, which I don't in my current role, but I did in a past life, and ensure that there is no way that my personal advice, the way that I conduct business is influenced by the particular industry that I'm working in, right? So I kind of break it down to, for me, all companies have a right to good advice, right? I choose not to work with illegal companies where I feel like they are completely illegal, but I also choose not to work with companies that I feel like take advantage of people or do things in an ethically gray arena that I don't think is legitimate. And so let me give you a good example about this, right? So I took on a client way back at the beginning of my company that was a financing company, and they, said they were fintech. It was cool, right? Like they're young entrepreneurs building this company. Well, come to find out that their fintech were these kiosks that they would put in stores like furniture stores or pet stores or high-end places where people could not afford to purchase things, and they sold abusive loans. That's what they did. They sold abusive loans, and they were basically like high-end title loan companies where they bought the item for you, whether it be a pet or a piece of furniture or some high-end, car, or they purchased these things for you, and then they leased it back to you until you had a buyout contract at the end. But they were so abusive, and the way they structured it got around all of the loan abuse rules and basically said, well, it's not really a loan, it's a lease. Wow. So there's completely different rules. And the interest rates were hundreds of percentage points. And it was ridiculous. Like some people were paying $10,000 for a $2,000 dog at the end of this lease. And when I figured that out, I said, that to me is an unethical business. I don't want any I don't want to work with them. Like, I don't want any affiliation with them. And it was, quite a bit in fees. And I canceled the contract. I said, look, like, I don't believe in your business. I don't want to be associated with the abusive nature of what you're doing and how you're making money. I believe is unethical. Yep. Now, contrast that to, same time frame, I was working with an investment group that was investing into cannabis companies, and they were doing a ton of due diligence on these cannabis companies, which if anyone's ever tried to do due diligence on cannabis companies, it's almost impossible because it's all cash. It's all like handshake deals. The contracts aren't there. It's, at least at that point, it's gotten a lot better, but it's still not great. At that point, there was nothing written down because they didn't want traces of anything, right? And I can understand why when you have an industry that is prosecuted on things that a whole other tangent I could go into. So we're working with the investment company. We're doing a lot of due diligence into these cannabis companies, and these were all state legal operators. Now, in my opinion, if a state legalizes something, we have, clauses protecting interstate commerce. We have clauses protecting the sanctity of states to be able to do what they think is right for their people. And the federal government very specifically targeted cannabis due to, historical and, in my opinion, racism issues, and, wanted to incarcerate a whole swath of people on something that was never that dangerous for the public and didn't pose the types of risks that they said it did when they got it passed as a Title I drug. So that, when you start looking and digging and looking at how the industry has been prosecuted, like what it looks like, how the legal industry has actually saved us from lots of trafficking and other issues with the illicit market, it is not an unethical industry to me. It is, the same as an alcohol industry. In fact, I think cannabis is less harmful than alcohol for people. And there are fewer people that die. And so, and I believe in individual rights, right? Like I believe that individuals have the rights to make decisions for themselves. And if they're not being posed in an abusive manner, then why would I not support that company, right? Whereas the other company, fully 100% legal, every way direction you look at it, there's no federal government saying they can't do that. There's nobody protecting people from these scams effectively. And they're able to legally perpetrate, like these leases that are just so abusive and harmful to people's financial state, and they have no idea what they're signing up for when they do it. It's not clear, it's not transparent. Whereas if somebody walks into a dispensary and buys, some flour and smokes it, they know exactly what they're getting into. And not only that, all of it is tested, all of it is written right on a label. They tell you like everything included in that. It's very clear, like literally from the second a seed is planted, they track the plant. So if there's any issues, they can do recalls. It is way safer for you from a health perspective than getting yourself into a crazy amount of debt. So that was a really long tangent to explain like where my ethics line is.
Yeah, I think it's really great because I love that distinction of the first example where maybe they are checking the boxes to be legal. However, those are clearly, I would hope, for most people, unethical practices. And, the decision to not support those types of things. And it even reminds me of, the mortgage industry going into the bust of all the predatory refinance loans and again, people who were extremely aggressive, they were hiding the details, and not disclosing what people were getting into. Those would be types of companies that I would never want to associate with from an ethical perspective because they're doing harm to human beings and to businesses and maybe that's it. Maybe it's almost like that, like no harm kind of clause. Like if you're doing harm to individuals or businesses or people, I, from a pure ethics perspective, I do not want to participate in those types of things.
Right.
I,
So I bow out in
yeah,
those
without a
cases.
doubt.
But I'll
Yeah.
also have no problem, working with prostitutes that are legally doing this with their own personal consent. They are not being trafficked. They are choosing to be sex workers, and that's totally great. That's what they want to do with their lives, right? So they need support too from a
Well,
CPA
and that's
perspective.
exactly it, right? They need support, and I think there's also an element of, you kind of said at the beginning, like being like pro business or even pro human. Like we have expertise, and kind of our role is helping people navigate the things that we are experts in. And if you are a professional gambler, if you are a legal prostitute, if you are a legal drug dealer, like all these things, they need support from a business perspective to file their taxes properly, to make sure that they don't go out of bounds. And like that's doing good. I don't think there's should be much debate about that. Although, I think a lot of people, confuse values and ethics, personal values and ethics. So
Hmm.
that's probably where it gets, people get caught. Like I know one of the questions comes up around like gambling, like can you be a CPA and a professional poker player? And for me, the answer is yes, absolutely. Like I think
Unless you're auditing the casino that you go to.
right, unless you are doing something that is outside of the if you were going to illegal poker rings and you are now asking a CPA to help make those winnings look legitimate, you are being asked to do illegal things in that case. So
That's
I
called money laundering.
that is
That's a
called.
line. Let's not cross that line. No laundering money. Check.
That's right. At least once you become a CPA, maybe pre-CPA, you could dabble, right?
I mean, that's a completely different conversation. But I would say if we're talking about the ethics as CPAs and the profession that we have chosen, right? Like, where is the line? And I think
Yep.
as long like I legitimately believe as long as you are not gambling at a casino that you audit, there's no issue, right? Like if you're legally gambling, legally,
Right.
doing that, like, yeah, that might mean that you're really bad with money if you have like a bit of a gambling addiction. And also, I know plenty of alcoholics that are CPAs and seem to do fine professionally. So tell me the difference.
That's fair. I absolutely. I absolutely. Now, how about I had a scenario again back to my IT days, where I had a client who I just did not like the way they treated their employees. Was
Mm,
was not, like was just not a nice human. And ultimately, it was somebody who, I had
gives you
to
the
walk
ick.
away from that relationship because I wasn't going to continue to, support somebody who's just so, rude and disrespectful to the people around them. And, for me, that was kind of a personal values
Hmm.
decision that, somebody like that is not somebody that I want to support. But that's
Right,
not an ethics. That's just my personal values as far as the
right.
people I want to associate with.
Right. And I think that's a really good line to draw because we do have many CPAs that are quite conservative in their belief systems, in their personal values, or even their religious values that come into play when they're looking at client acceptance. And I think that that's completely fine. You are an independent CPA. You get to decide what clients you take on and what you don't and why. So if your line is different, then your line is different, right? Because of your upbringing or because of your values or, the church that you go to or whatever it is. And that is also like completely acceptable, but it doesn't mean that what other people are doing is unethical. It just
Right.
means that you don't align your practice in the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, that's exactly right. And I think that's, a really important distinction for anybody who is, especially going into a career and evaluating potential employers or,
Hmm.
like maybe even hanging their own shingle as far as, building a business and defining, what those boundaries are of who you're willing to work with, who you're willing to accept revenue from, and what those things are that are inbounds versus out of bounds.
And, I think there's a good conversation to be had here as well about like what you do in your spare time, right? I think our profession is one of conservative values in general. And we end up with a lot of people that have very specific belief systems around what you should be allowed to do in your off time. And there are firms that might say, hey, you're not allowed to gamble. Hey, you're not allowed to partake in whatever other sin industry you want to personally partake in or have a side hustle in or whatever else it is. And that's also
Sure.
okay. Those are their policies. Doesn't mean it's unethical. It just means it's the policies the firm you're working with or the policies you're setting for your own firm. And those things are totally fine. The bigger picture, I think, is when you have issues, right? So I think the stigma comes from like gambling or from like cannabis or other I would say more illicit drugs causes people to get into addictive behavior patterns. And what happens when you're in an addictive behavior pattern is you are not smart with your money and then you end up in bad financial situations, in which case it could become a serious ethical concern for you, because you are no longer independent. You're no longer thinking independent. You are in debt or you're in debt to bad people in the underground gambling market. Like there are so many ways that you can hurt yourself personally and put yourself in a bad position that many people say, I won't work with or I won't talk to, or because that happens too often. In my experience, that doesn't actually happen very often at all. It's very rare that somebody has such a strong gambling addiction they end up in debt to the mafia. Like we're not, sitting in high times of mafia lending and gambling. But I have seen it happen. And when it does, it's ugly. It's not good. And I think honestly, most people in this day and age are getting in trouble with sports betting and taking on a
Yeah.
bit too much debt on the sports betting side than anything else. But I've also seen people short the market and fail and then end up owing a ton. in their bad, stock investment. So it's like, to me, that's gambling. It's just highbrow gambling, where
Oh
you can
yeah.
end up in just as much debt. You just don't have
Yeah.
people coming after you with bats. They just, file UCC claims against your house and take your
The,
assets.
it's so true. You literally just zoomed me back to like my early years. I'll never forget this client I had as a staff accountant who, see, how do I put it? Had a very strong set of religious beliefs. In fact, his business was built around those religious beliefs. And then on the flip side, his family was in major debt because of puts, calls, and options that he was trading in the
Hmm.
stock market. And it was just mind blowing year after year when he would show up with his statements and the losses. I mean, eventually, I left that firm before I saw, the ultimate demise of what he was doing. But ultimately, his marriage ended. Like there was some financial ruin, and that was all in the stock market.
Hmm.
It's just
Yep.
wild.
Yes. So I think some of the bad rap that people in these industries are partaking in professional gambling or other type of things is that they're hiding money or that they're not reporting. And I don't think that's true. Like most of these people are truly doing this as either a hobby or a side hustle or whatever. And when they make money, they report it. They don't try to hide it. And also, like, there's very easy ways to look at what is legitimate earnings and what were legitimate expenses. It's not that gray if you handle it on a regular basis. And I can tell you, doing tax returns in Nevada for a number of years, like it's every day you see gambling, wins and losses, and you can substantiate it and report it accurately. So I think that the ethics there is like, are you working with somebody that wants to cheat on their taxes? And in which case, cheating around gambling is really small because it's hard to do. Whereas starting an LLC and running all of your personal expenses through it is also cheating and very easy to do and happens way more often.
Yeah, yeah, that's such a great point, right? It's those tragedies of extreme abuse
Hmm.
get talked about and just discussed as if they are everyday things. And you're
Hmm.
so right. They are so rare, but the just common, like, well, just deduct, all of my living expenses. They like the misuse with respect to tax preparation or requests for misuse are pretty
Uh-huh.
significant on a daily basis in
Right. So
taxes.
I think the line there to me is like, are you a TikTok accountant? Are you telling people to deduct everything and making up schemes and telling them to do things that are quite clearly illegal or abusive or even on the IRS's list of like biggest ways to get audited? Um, if you're telling people to do that, that's unethical. You can't do that. Like, don't do that. Don't listen to advice on the internet without like actually verifying and looking up what's real and what's not. But yeah, like ethically reporting gambling winnings, easy, very easy.
That's right.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think, as you consider like what you're doing and how it goes when you're looking at this and trying to align, like, is this an ethical issue or is this not an ethical issue, right? A lot of people look at the big firms. And so I can tell you, working in cannabis, not all of the big firms will take cannabis companies right now. And so we have very many audit partners and specialty tax partners that we work with in top 10, top 100 firms. And it's not every single one of them that'll work with our cannabis companies. And part of that is because either they are headquartered in states where it's not legal in that state, and that's where their headquarters are. So their legal team has taken a hard position. Or they have government contracts, federal government contracts
Yep.
that they're worried about losing if they don't do everything to the federal government's liking. And of course, we know that that depends on the administration and what's happening in that moment. And they're trying to take positions that'll be time tested and true versus anything else. And so it is a very conservative position not to do that, but they do have reasons. They are not ethical reasons. They are business reasons.
That's right. They
Right.
may be, their insurance broker may have influence on that reason. Like you said, the contracts. I mean, these are business decisions as opposed to the ethical ones. I mean, I just heard recently about a firm who just had to let go of one of their accountants who had taken on a second full-time accounting job. A remote accountant who was working two full-time remote accounting jobs.
We
This
had
is
that happen.
ethical. Did you really?
Yes. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Multiple times, actually.
Wow. That's, and so I'm curious, did those individuals recognize that what they had done was not ethical?
No, absolutely not. In the conversations I had, there were two individuals that this happened with in the last 10 years. The first one was more gray area. She was working in a family business before coming to work for us. And then basically graduated college, wanted a real job, came to work for us. The family needed help, and she went back to work for them full time without disclosing it to us. And basically was attempting to work 80 hours a week to maintain two full time jobs. Why I say it was a little bit more gray is because I think that family is really important. And if you have a family business, like that's where your priorities should be. And also, you can't just not disclose that to your current employer when you go do that, right? So she ended up leaving for the family business, and we parted ways in a, I would say fine fashion, right? I do not think she saw it as an ethical concern in any way, shape, or form. And didn't really understand why I was upset when this was not disclosed, but whatever it is. And the second one took on a full-time remote bookkeeping position outside of doing they were like an accounting senior for us. And it was their reasoning was it was a lower level job. It was for financial support instead of their explanation, not mine, instead of going and getting, a part-time job at Walmart or McDonald's or something to supplement income. Right. Which, I would say to a big swath of the upcoming generation, it's normal to have two jobs. What nobody talks to them about is disclosure, and also what it means when you are focused on one thing versus what you're being paid for at another company, right? And so we paid her to be available 40 hours a week, normal business hours.
On your things.
Correct. And she was not only missing meetings and not performing on deliverables, but was also in meetings for this other company and in training for this other company, and misrepresented as well. Took a week off for a full-time training at this other company and just got paid by us because it was paid time off, but didn't disclose what the week it was for, and that crosses the line, right? When you're getting paid by two jobs for the same time and you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing and lying about it, right? And so if you feel like you can't disclose to your current employer, like this other job you got or this other thing that you got, that means there's probably an ethical concern and you're probably violating the terms of your employment.
Yeah, no doubt. And, it's interesting because I can see the line of gray in the first situation, in the sense it sounded like she was also attempting to get all of the work done. Like there wasn't like an overlapping of lack of deliverables or being paid here like that. Like so I can appreciate that there wasn't an attempt to basically steal from you. Like she was attempting to actually just work two full-time jobs. And some disclosure probably would have enabled her to maybe even accomplish some degree of it, having a proactive conversation. But the second one, I mean, that's just just clearly in so many respects. I mean,
Yes, just not
yeah,
good. And I think that unfortunately, where we sit in our economy, like we need wages to increase in our profession
sure.
faster than they are. And also, like as a business owner, I can only pay what my clients are willing to pay us for that work. And we're pushing the boundaries. Like we are on the upper echelon, right? And I honestly wish I could pay people twice as much as we do.
Of course.
But at the same time, like we have to get the clients to pay that, right? And value what we're doing in return. So I think there's a lot of ethical issues that can happen. Do I think if you are a professional gambler and poker player in your spare time, you have ethical concerns? No. If you're gambling at casinos, you're auditing, 1000% an ethical issue. If you're taking on debt that is making you make bad life decisions, that's an ethical issue. But the same thing goes with addiction or other,
Sure.
you want to partake in other places. Like if you cross the line of, I am now making bad personal decisions, I am putting my health or my financial health at risk because of this, and I am making decisions at work that are clouded by this, other life issue, that is an ethical concern. But that's a pretty big hole to dig yourself.
Yeah, without a doubt. Without a doubt. So yeah, I think, coming back to kind of like the idea of this conversation as far as, the potential traps for accountants and ethical hobbies or professions or side hustles. It really, I think the rule of thumb should be, if you're going to question it, whether or not it's ethical, then there's probably a good chance that there's something you need to explore with somebody else, maybe an outsider, to help you explore whether or not your inbounds or out of bounds from an ethical
Yeah.
perspective.
Well, and I think what you said earlier resonates so heavily. Like, is this a you personal values conflict, or is this an actual ethical conflict, right? And that is a big distinction that people need to think about and consider around anything, right? Client acceptance is one piece
Yeah.
of it. But personal, like what you're willing to do or partake in on weekends, like that's a decision too. And then I think underlying all of it, at this point, I don't think there's any reputational damage that can happen specifically for servicing legal industries that may be morally or value based gray to whatever morals or values you grew up in, but ethically
Right.
completely legal, legitimate, and not intending to harm anyone. Um, I do think the exception there would be if you have a practice focused on like churches and you start taking on industries that the church is against, like that might cause a reputational harm for your specific chosen industry, but
Right.
also likely a values alignment issue. But outside of that, or outside of like very extreme circumstances as a CPA firm or as a CPA in general, as an individual, do I think it would hurt your reputation? No. I mean, we've gotten so many more clients working in industries that other people say no to or get scared of because they're worried about the IRS implications or so much cash or the complexity of it, or there's a million reasons why people avoid working in some of these industries or working with clients in these industries. um, but we've gotten tons of clients and lots of reputable clients on the other side of the business too that don't care
Sure.
that we have clients that do these things, right?
Right.
I can't say we
Yep.
don't work with any churches though, or religious organizations in general.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's really it, right? Because if you are concerned that something may alienate a group that you currently serve, then again, this is back to the business decision. That's a business
Mhm.
decision. And you're
Yep.
making a business decision that if somebody has a problem with the fact that you support those businesses, that's also not a client that you probably want anyway. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a filter in both respects of it
Hmm.
will attract the clients that you do want and it will repel the clients that you don't want anyway.
Hmm. Yeah. So in summary, sin industries are lots of fun. They are fun from an accounting perspective as well. I don't believe there's ethical concerns on working with legal businesses. I think that people need to think about their values and alignment on that side and make business decisions that work for what they're doing, but really think about this in different buckets versus just grouping it all into this is the sin industry, this bucket is bad, I'm not going to touch it, because that is very old thinking and does not help those businesses and does not overall help our economy or do what CPAs are supposed to do, which is support healthy businesses and clean information.
That is absolutely right. And this is also coming from two CPAs who are happy to put their tattoos on display and wear them with pride, which a few decades ago would not be so well accepted.
Accurate. And who may have or may not have partaken in poker tournaments in the past.
Who knows? Who knows? Maybe we'll see you there.
Well, thanks for the conversation, Byron.
Oh, thank you. Always good stories.
See you guys later.
See you.
The Center for Accounting Transformation provides business professionals with a network for utilizing innovations that are ready for adoption, the training and resources necessary to apply those innovations, and an opportunity to engage the talent and community needed to further the pursuit of innovative accounting practices that drive responsible and mindful business performance. Find out more at our website, www.improvetheworld.net. And if you're interested in sharing your own transformation stories, please contact us there.